Welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast. Now, seeing that we've just released a video on our YouTube channel all about community energy in Texas, we thought we should release this talk. But rather than it being about Texas, it's mainly about good old Blighty. So in this talk, which was recorded at Fully Charged Live on Saturday the 9th of June 2019, Maddie Moat spoke to a world-class panel about can community energy be the answer? On stage, Maddie welcomes Sarah Merrick from Ripple Energy, Hannah Stanley from Regen, and Patrick Allcorn from BEIS. Now that's BEIS, which is the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is a UK government department. Now, before we begin this talk, we are absolutely thrilled to announce that we've just ticked over 1 million downloads on the Fully Charged Show podcast, which is incredible. It's not in less than a year. 1 million, which is really brilliant. So thank you so much for all of those of you who've kind of shared this podcast or told people about it and shared it with your friends and your families and your colleagues and all that stuff. And we are now going to take a couple of Mondays off for the first time since we started doing it, all the way through Crimbo Limbo. It's my favourite term. So we're not going to be here, but we'll be back with the Fully Charged Show podcast. We'll be back on the 6th of January. So for now, please enjoy the panel.
Okay, I am looking forward to this conversation. We've already been discussing everything off stage, so I'm hoping you can remember everything we've just said because I want you to be able to share it with everyone here. So let's start with this idea of what is community energy. So I guess what we're doing here, we're moving away from centralised power stations and dirty fossil fuels to localised community options where we're looking at clean energy, wind and solar and so forth.
Yeah, so essentially as we're going towards this energy transition, we're moving, as you say, away from we're going towards decarbonised, we're becoming more decentralised and also democratised as well. So it's all about getting the engagement of the people in the community and sort of giving the power to the people that pay the bills, essentially, and actually giving them that sense of ownership, so becoming shareholders in renewable generation, but also taking more management on the sort of energy demand and reducing that themselves.
Yeah.
So.
Just because we're competing with the race cars over there, if everyone can just lift their microphones, that would be amazing. Can everybody hear us okay, even at the back? Are we all right? I appreciate it's quite a noisy room, so thank you so much. So community energy, it does take various forms. I've heard of communities who are investing in solar or in wind. Can perhaps you take us through some success stories where you've seen communities gathering together? Do you want to take this one?
So we're Ripple. So we haven't yet started. We haven't launched our first project yet, but we basically want people. So communities are people. They don't necessarily have to be located in a village or a town. We want everyone to be able to own their own source of clean power. So basically just getting together and owning large-scale assets. That could be wind or it could be solar. And then just getting the clean, low-cost electricity supplied to their home in a really, really simple way.
So I'm going to hop in here. So when I first heard about community energy, I thought this was a community, so a neighbourhood, friends if you like, getting together. They all live in the same village and they're getting together because they want to invest in a solar farm or a wind turbine. So myself, first of all, I rent my home, so I can't go put solar panels on my roof even if I wanted to. And also, I'm rarely at home and I don't really know my community. Which is not meant to be a sob story, but it's true. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't like to get involved in a community project. We're all a community here, but we don't necessarily know each other, and that's what you're offering.
Exactly. So it's about getting accessibility, enable everyone to be able to access clean, low-cost wind or solar as part of a community. So it's whether you live in a city, whether you rent, everyone should be able to access energy ownership.
Okay, Hannah, what about you? Any success stories?
Yeah, so going back to that sort of inherent idea of actual local communities, there was a fantastic community energy group in London called Brixton Energy, and it took it back to that kind of locality thing where they were putting solar panels on the flats in London, and it was again very much involved with engaging with the community, getting people to understand what renewable energy actually was and the benefits of it, which was fantastic. But again, it goes out to that wider community, because not only are you engaging with those people that are like in your set of flats or sort of your next door neighbours, but the stories that you're able to tell, like we're doing right now, then enables your community to grow and understand a little bit more about what actually renewable generation is all about.
Okay, and Patrick, so you work on much larger scale projects, but...
Well, yeah, so just to clarify, BEIS is the government department responsible for energy and climate change, and I lead on community energy for the department. So we see examples of communities of place where they have bought into wind farms and are generating hundreds of thousands of pounds a year for that community to invest in that community. And they've insulated homes, they've built sports facilities, they've built cycleways off route to schools to let the kids get to secondary school. So they've used that energy to make the place that they want, because the energy has a value. And I think that for us is the key to community energy, is around the ownership and the reinvestment of that value into your communities in any way, shape or form that the community wants to see, building assets, building benefits for everybody in that community.
So can I just check, so what's happened in that instance is the community have invested in part of a wind turbine, did you say?
Well, in fact, in that instance, a commercial developer wanted to develop a wind farm, and the community refused permission until they gave them 10%.
Oh, wow.
And they pay that back, that 10% they pay back through the income every year. And after 5 years, of course, you can refinance. So you go and get somebody else to finance some of that and give you some more money, and you release the equity in that project for the value in the community. So there they were exploiting an opportunity. There's an example in Derbyshire where there's a river in the Peak District, and the local shop and the local pub were closing. So the community got together and they put in a hydro scheme in the river that gives the pub and the shop free energy. And no, those two are still operating because they don't have high overheads. So that community have used that to keep the community, the heart of the community, together. It's not there to make millions for the community, it's there to give the community that ownership and that ability to shape the place they want to live.
How does that work, though? How do the community then... So let's say you've invested, you're now getting enough energy back to completely offset all the community's bills. How do they then decide how the rest of the money is going to get spent?
Well, so most of them have community panels, community benefit funds that are given over to independents to run. So an independent panel sit down and they open up either a beauty parade, which is where, and you'll have seen some of these if you're into your energy, where lots of different projects write a short brief of what they want to do, and people can vote online for their favourites, and the top 2 get funded this year and the next 2 get funded next year. Or in Scotland and in Wales, where they're doing it through community development trusts, they have a whole list of communal projects that everybody has signed up to. And in England, you can do this through neighbourhood planning, but very few communities have. And you're doing it at a much grander, much more democratic scale, because that's part of your local plan, the local substance that your council have agreed and bought into.
So I love this idea of, a democracy within communities, making it work. But like I said at the beginning, I'm an individual living within a community I don't really know. And as much as I would like to put solar panels on my roof or to invest in solar, actually, we don't necessarily have that money for investment right now. And also, we'd be limited as to the type of solar panels we could put on our roof anyway, just because of the style of property it is. What seems to be one of the benefits of community energy is how scalable it suddenly becomes. Would you want to talk about this a bit?
Yeah, so obviously, as we move to a zero carbon world, there will be loads more wind farms, loads more solar parks being built. A huge change that means is that we won't have coal stations. Consumers and individuals cannot own a bit of a coal station or a nuclear station or a gas station.
No.
They totally can own a bit of a wind farm or a solar park. So on a really, really large scale, and we want to open up community projects. Traditionally, they've been quite small-scale projects. We want to get the very best, the very biggest projects available and accessible for everyone. So yeah,
Right.
totally scalable, big-scale projects, not necessarily a little single turbine or whatever.
So for a typical household, roughly how much would it cost to buy a bit of a wind farm?
Very, very roughly, it's project-specific, but very roughly it's around £1,300.
And where's that cost coming from?
So the cost of that is actually buying the turbines, buying the projects, and getting them built. So once you've built your bit of a turbine or you've built the wind farm with all of everyone's money, those customers or the owners can then basically get access to the low-cost electricity for the lifetime of the project. So obviously the big part of the cost of wind is getting it built. Then once it's built, the actual cost of generating electricity is incredibly low and incredibly stable for its 25-year lifetime. And that's what the owners can access, essentially.
Okay, feel free to hop in, yeah.
And I think there are other routes to market. So I think in Lewis, in Sussex, the community did a deal with the brewery, Harvey's Brewery. There are other breweries available to put solar on the roof that they owned, but that Harvey's would take the power from for their chillers and for their processes. And so the community raised £350,000, and the minimum input was £50, so anybody could have a share. And each of those people, whether they put in £50 or £5,000, had an equal share in that community company. And that money put the solar on the roof, it's still there, and it's generating a return on the investment, and it's generating a community fund, and Harvey's now have a sunshine beer. So you can go down to Sussex and drink sunshine beer generated by community. And I think there's all sorts of different mechanisms for getting involved in these projects. Bay Wind and Energy from All do a similar sort of open share offer. We've seen football clubs doing things with their fans where they give away prizes and try and offset the club's energy use. By having people in their homes do other things. So there's all sorts of ways communities of different kinds can get involved and play a role in that transition.
We were sort of joking about a wedding list scenario, weren't we, earlier on? Sort of like, oh, would you like to buy a bit of a wind turbine for me instead of, buy me a toaster? Which I actually think is a really fun idea.
Who wouldn't want a wind turbine for their wedding,
I know, right?
basically?
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Not at all. So I was just thinking along the same lines of, there are some people who tend to not have so much money to be able to put into renewables or be able to actually take a share in these renewable generations. So the other side of community energy, which I think is absolutely fantastic, are the opportunity to get involved with your actual community and discuss options such as, and it's the simple things, it's like the non-sexy part of community energy where you're talking about demand reduction, so things like changing your light bulbs to sort of low emitting light bulbs, or sort of that side of things that people don't tend to sort of think about with community energy.
And on that, we've seen an example where one of the power companies did an experiment or a pilot scheme with 5,000 people, and it reduced the energy just by doing household things like that. They reduced the need for energy in that area to remove the need for a £4 million upgrade to the substation. Now that £4 million would have gone onto your bills. So you're reducing your bills and reducing the amount that the energy company charges you for your bills just by doing that as a community where everybody's working together. So I think there are some really interesting opportunities around how you can cross over from generation to demand side, from power to heat to EVs. So the idea that somebody was talking about yesterday of rural pub car parks being used as community car clubs with electric charging, so that you don't have to have a second car because there's one available when you need it in the village. It won't reduce first car ownership because in those rural places you'll need a car, But actually for those occasional journeys that the household makes, there's an opportunity for the village hall, for the pub, whatever that is. So I think there are some really interesting crossovers there.
Can I kind of backtrack a little bit here and sort of say, why is community energy needed now? We were talking briefly about, well, actually, there's a misconception I think we've all heard a lot this weekend, which is the national grid can't cope. They can't, how would they be able to handle everybody suddenly converting to solar power renewables overnight? And you've been suggesting that actually community energy is better. It would help.
Yeah, most definitely. So there's some projects that we're running at the moment alongside Western Power Distribution, which is essentially one of the network operators of the country. So they're the people that look after the energy transferring through our wires. And they're actually going out to local energy and community energy in areas where they're basically what's known as procuring flexibility. And that's exactly what this is. It's about talking to the local community to say, okay, we have an area of constraint here where the demand we think is going to be quite high, and we need to be able to reduce that or manage it at a local level. Is there anything that we can do in partnership to allow us to do this? And I think that's a really key part of our transition.
But I think it goes further than that. I mean, the reality is we will build nuclear power stations, or we'll build whatever power stations we need, offshore wind, with massive investment from international companies if we need it to power this transition. That's just the reality. But this is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to change the ownership model, to change the flow of benefits from those big international companies to local. So if you talk to Low Carbon Oxford, based in Oxfordshire, they estimate over £1 billion was spent in Oxfordshire last year on energy bills. So capturing some of that, instead of it all going out to foreign companies, capturing some of that and reinvesting it into your adult social care, into your transport systems, into whatever you decide you want to see, has got to be a better model going forward.
Yeah. Sarah and Hannah, do you want to pick up on this first?
So, like I said before, this is a huge opportunity as we move away from centralised coal stations, nuclear stations, gas stations, is that people can own them, and we do not need big utilities or pension funds or infrastructure funds to own our energy assets anymore. We can just own them ourselves and have complete control right through from generation right through to our consumption.
Yeah, and it goes again, like as you were saying, it's all about understanding that and understanding the changes that we're going through and being part of that. Like if we're saying that we're going to become a democratic energy system, that's us. That's like this is us now, who's in this room. And part of that is understanding, part of that is behaviour change with demand reduction. And in order to do that, in order to have that understanding, you need almost like a platform of trust, And who better to have that from than the community that you're in? You're going to trust these people. I mean, rather than sort of large conglomerates, if you like. I mean, you're going to understand these guys.
But what's nice as well is that, yes, that trust is important within communities, but it's good that there are options out there now if you don't necessarily have that. It's something we've spoken a lot about investing or buying into projects outside of your own home. But there are a lot of people who are already, they've already got solar panels, they've already got batteries in their home. And there's a lot of talk about sort of creating mini networks within the grid and helping support your neighbourhoods that way. I kind of think if you've got the grid, I almost think of them as little waffles, sort of like that take up that space and everybody can share and make the most of it. Is that an alternative option?
Yeah, so there is that. I mean, for example, up in Bristol, there's this project called the Owen Square Project, which is essentially looking at a microgrid. And they've got their own generation, they've got solar panels, they've also got storage, so if there's any excess generation that they're not being used. And they're looking to make it into a microgrid, exactly as you say, that's going to run, I believe, parallel with the network, the grid, and become completely sustainable on their own. I mean, if we're looking towards becoming completely decentralized, then in some people's minds that would be sort of like the utopia, but I think it comes with its own challenges. So I think, as you were saying, it's very important also, if you don't have your own community, there are other options available.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've got the national grid already, and we've paid a lot of money to get a really fantastic grid, so we might as well use it. But I think as part of the decentralization that we're seeing, it's more... We're going to see more of a patchwork of different models. So it's not just all one thing or all another. There's scope for lots of different solutions across the country.
Okay. Patrick, do you want to just end this, and then I'm actually going to take some questions.
Not
yet. Hold your horses. There we go.
Last thing I'd say on that is, the big cities will never, ever be able to generate enough energy in them to meet their needs. Just think about if every bus in London was to become electric, we would need a terawatt of extra generation just for the bus network, which is about the same as the tube network uses now. So you think about the scale of that requirement for London and the opportunity. So if you're in a community that can have a wind turbine, building it to meet your needs, or building it to meet your needs and the ability to sell it and get more money for your community, we have to think about UK PLC as well as the self-sustainability of the communities. And if you look at Germany, they own their generation, they own their networks, they own their heat networks, and they sell that where they can to neighboring communities, because that way everybody gets to become part of that transition, and it's a fairer transition.
Thank you so much. So, okay, some very keen questions. Hands up going immediately. Fran's here. She's going to be going around with a microphone. If we can keep them to questions, not statements, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Yes, hello. We're from Oxford, and there are lots of exciting things happening in Oxford.
I was born near there.
Community projects with a couple of hydro schemes. So you've talked about the sort of big community projects and individual actions that individual households can do. But what about a sort of a small group of houses? Say 20 houses got together. What could they realistically do in terms of a community, joint project?
Yeah, Hannah.
Obviously, the geography of the place and the opportunity, but we have communities now doing shared ground loops for heat pumps, where they're buying because ground source heat pumps are very expensive. Actually, sharing that infrastructure cost makes them much cheaper. So we have a community in Firle in West Sussex that are looking at putting in a small network of heat pumps that will heat the whole of those. I think it's 35 houses there, but with the local share issue and working with the local landlords and like. So you can do heat, you can lease cars and run a car club. And reduce the amount of traffic that goes in. I mean, we've seen people doing all sorts of different innovation. Those houses that are south-facing can put solar on and can share that with other houses. There are some technical difficulties that you have to get over, but working as a community with your DNO, whether that is, I think it's probably UKPN in Oxfordshire. No, who is it? Western Power. Well, there you go. So they've got some good track record of doing that with places like Wadebridge in Cornwall, with time of use tariffs for a small number of houses. So there's lots of different things across the different technologies and vectors that you could look at doing. But the biggest thing you could do is get the rest of your community engaged and talking about it.
Did you have anything, if you want to add to that?
I was going to just say that very moment that you just ensure that people are involved and sort of even maybe create a community that just goes to the pub and talks and tries to figure out, understand a little bit more about what's going on. But also, unusually as well, I found out the other day, there's also, as you were talking about car clubs, there's a company or a charity where you can actually get a charge point installed in your local community. I'm not 100% sure about how it works, but it's Zero Carbon World, where they basically give you a charge point for free, and then the cost is very, very minimal for sort of the people that are using it. But
perhaps that's something that you can pick up afterwards, actually, because that might be an interesting thing for you to discuss. But it's so nice to see that communities are coming together and actually want to do this. I can see you taking notes, and it makes me so happy. At the back, there's a gentleman with a green T-shirt on.
Hi there. There's been a great discussion, and I've been involved in community energy for about 10 years now, so I definitely commend it to everyone to get involved with. It's a really positive thing. Sorry, Patrick, this might be a slightly awkward question, but given that onshore wind and solar are the kind of cheapest options for renewable energy, and that those are great ways for communities to get involved, why is it that the government are still not supporting those, aren't allowing wind through the system in England, and aren't have cut the feed-in tariff and so on?
Okay.
Very quick answer to a very complex question. So the wind is a political decision. It was in the Conservative Party manifesto, and that is purely a political decision. So you could imagine a future Conservative government or a future government of other from the Labour Party or one of the other parties may well choose to change that, but that is purely a political decision. Technically, if you have a neighbourhood plan that sets aside land for onshore wind, and that is adopted by your council, so about 5 years' time, you can still do onshore wind. So it's not an outright ban, but it's very, very, very difficult to do. The solar is a different argument, which is around the level of subsidy, the level of benefit, and the cost coming down, and the fact that actually subsidies have never managed to keep pace with the reduction in prices. And most solar, especially co-location or at scale, is now about break-even point with the rest of the grid. So there is no requirement to fund it. We can argue the models and the technical economics.
Sarah can add to this as well. I know that.
Yes, I was going to say, onshore wind is the UK's cheapest source of electricity. So actually, by getting new models, namely letting consumers own the new wind farms that are coming forward, we don't think that you need any subsidies anymore. That there can be new non-subsidised models, and the industry just needs to get on with rolling them out. Planning in England is a massive problem, but I think the more that you can get consumers creating that sort of bottom-up push in the planning system, we think that over time, it's not going to happen overnight, but gradually you can get that sort of local pressure on the English planning system, which will have to get projects coming through.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take one more question just from this side of the room. I'll run it. It's okay. It's a bit quicker. Here you go.
You've said a lot about what can be done, but where would a community go who doesn't know anything about this as a first step to find out more and get them on their own? Because trying to reinvent the wheel for every new community is going to be a problem.
So the very quick answer, Community Energy England. Community Energy England is a network for communities in England. There is a Community Energy Wales and a Local Energy and a Community Energy Scotland. So it covers the whole of of Great Britain. Community Energy Fortnight starts on June the 22nd with a big conference in Sheffield. So if you're really interested in going to the next step, go and meet them, go and talk to them. They have a community energy hub online that does exactly that. It has a whole load of case studies, a whole load of contacts, and is set up to help first-come communities to make those first steps.
And Hannah, happy with that?
Yeah, I was basically going to say exactly those things. And also they have this fantastic directory. So in your area, they'll show you what community energy groups there are that you'd be able to maybe go and find. So yeah.
And having just reopened the Rural Community Energy Fund and forgotten all about it, because that was last week's work. So for those communities that are rural, there is now a grant funding scheme for community feasibility projects. You can get up to £40,000 for a feasibility study and up to £100,000 to develop that into a business case for investment. So you have to be a registered community, either a community interest company or a BENCOM. All of the information on how to do that is on Community Energy England's website, but that funding is now there. The government opened it May the 31st, and there's £10 million in that fund for the next 2 years. So please, go out, get your community set up, and let's do something interesting.
Great stuff. Thank you so much. That just about brings us to time. Do you have to run off? Does anyone have to run off immediately after? If anyone does have any more burning questions they didn't necessarily want to ask here, why don't I suggest that we sort of move the conversation just up towards maybe just move away from this white barrier here, just to the corner, just by eSmart Networks, if that's okay, if you want to hang around, because next we've got a session immediately after, which is going to be a Q&A for families. So thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed that discussion. Can everyone please put their hands together for our wonderful panelists?
Thank you to all our panelists who took part in this talk, and for the audience who was so engaged. I mean, it was an extraordinary event. There's another one coming up soon. Talk about that in a minute. But leave us a 5-star rating and review on your favourite podcast player, as it does help us get discovered. That does make a difference and increases our reach to spread the sustainability, clean tech message. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our 2 YouTube channels. We've just passed over 600,000 subscribers on the Fully Charged Show YouTube channel, and we're doing very well on Fully Charged Regen. On Fully Charged Regen, we put sort of odd things that we can't fit onto the standard channel, and also all these talks, which were videoed as well, so you can watch them as you can see who's talking. That's the big difference. It sounds the same, but you can see who it is who's talking. There are 4 reasons that I want to list briefly to go to the fullycharged.show website, which can be found at www.fullycharged.show. Such a cool address. So you can get Fully Charged live tickets, and all the information about that. Local and international event tickets are available there. If you're looking for a wonderful supplier and firms that pass the strict Fully Charged guidelines for sustainability and technology, check them out on our fabulous A to Z guide, which is really getting very comprehensive now. The A to Z, all things renewable electric vehicles, bikes, all that stuff, home stuff, everything. It's brilliant. Merchandise. Now, we do have a brand new selection of sustainable merchandise on there too. And don't worry about all sales profits go straight back into making the show better, actually producing episodes either of the podcast or of Fully Charged Show. And lastly, we do want to do a really massive thanks, an end-of-year thanks to all our wonderful Patreon supporters. Without your help, we simply couldn't be able to keep you informed, and we couldn't make the shows we make. We've been producing 2 shows a week on YouTube recently. So if you would like to support us, Patreon might be a good fit. But as always, there's literally no pressure to do so, but you can find the links to that in the show notes. And as always, if you have been, thank you for listening, and Happy New Year.